Hi, everybody. Are we good? Perfect. My name is Arjun. I'm a principal product designer at Canvs. We're an interface design studio based in Bombay and Bangalore. We've been around since about 2015, and sort of we work with like the pioneers in the banking and healthcare industry. This is our first event that we're doing in Bangalore. We've been doing events in Bombay before this, and we thank you all for coming out to the first edition of Demo Nights. Genuinely, what we wanted to create was just a, oh, jeez.
Caffeinate.
Sorry.
Caffeinate.
Yeah,
it's turning off.
Yeah. What we wanted to do is just allow a space for creatives to just come and present anything interesting that they're up to, right? As well as we wanted to curate the audience to make sure that the crowd is a small number of people, a well-curated audience so that true networking can happen, and it's not just another event where we're just trying to get sign-ups and email IDs from anybody, right? So we thank you guys for being part of the first edition. What we're going to do here is the order of events is going to be, we have an hour of presentations from 4 speakers, and then after that we have about 90 minutes where we can just do whatever.
Hey, hi. Audible, not audible? I think it should be good, right? Yeah. Yeah, so, okay. Now I get it, yeah. So it's, the image is just for the tech challenges so that you see a very calming image. Moving on. Yeah, I'm Debanshu. I'm an artist and I'm Debanshu and I'm an artist and I run this studio called 1377. We work with a lot of emerging technologies, and generally we do all things which are like physical, not like physical in terms of tangible and experiences for designs for spaces. So I'll show you some of my projects which are to do with AI. I'll like to play this video. So this project is called No Feeling is Final. This was this was commissioned by a university, and we were trying to explore what if machine starts to make some kind of artworks. And like the general, like all designers' jobs are kind of in khatra today, so so we don't have to be afraid, I feel, as long as we see that AI is probably just a tool in the end. So yeah. Yeah, so the project was basically how we can kind of talk about emotions, but think about creating something to do with emotions, but everything is generated by an AI, and it is kind of being plotted live onto a 9 feet by a 3 feet kind of a canvas. So you see, what you see over here is a huge plotter, which is probably this big height, and what we are trying to ask our visitors is how are you feeling today, or things that basically points to some kind of questions around how do you feel and what are you going through. So, and as soon as that information comes in form of a text, we are trying to do analysis of it, emotional analysis of it, and then we are trying to plot it live. Yeah, so there's a lot of tech that happens behind installation, which seems to be very simple. So what we are trying to do here is, like you see, there is a question prompt with a text response, and then we are doing so this entire system is built on Raspberry Pi. If you know, it's a very small computer, like a pocket-sized computer, with a very limited computing power. But what we are trying to do over here is, we have a very small Llama model, which is running locally, and it is doing a very basic emotional analysis of the text input that we get. And the emotional analysis is being crafted into 11 emotions. And then there's some creativity that we are doing, basically how that gets translated into different shapes. And the shapes are turned into G code because the machine doesn't understand any emotions. So G code is something, a language which tells the plotter, okay, go to this you know, like how your XY thing is there. So basically that, and then it is plotting. So you see the front end, then there's a lot of back end, then there's another set of back end, and then another back end, and then another back end. So heavily relying on the translation of a simple text into something which is physical. And everything is done real time. So these are all the mathematical equations that I have written. And you know, like the surprise, equation for surprise is very surprising. That is a very complicated function. And what we are doing, and again, like we are not putting only one emotion per text response. We are doing multiple emotions because a text response is never that, okay, my text is just angry. It will have hints of maybe sadness, you know, like hints of maybe also like rage, something like that. So the entire graph you see over here is divided into those emotions. And what essentially is happening that over the day you see the mood of the entire conference. You know, like this was done for a conference. So over the day it's a live data visual that is being plotted. And then you can figure out that, okay, people are not happy, people maybe attended a very boring talk, and then coming back and not happy or something like that. So that you could see, but yeah, so that was the data interpretation part. So yeah, so this is something which is called No Feeling is Silent. This is a current, and that was done maybe I think 2 years ago, somewhere where the AI craze was still not AI craze as we know of it. But today there is a AI craze. So this is a project which I've just done for NGO working in the education sector. So they do a lot of, they are building a youth futures center where they do a lot of workshops using different kind of scenario building tools. So this is one of those tools. So I'll try to do a demo of this. It is called Futures of Hope. So Futures of Hope is basically a project that kind of uses the power of AI. And again, the power of AI, why? Because AI gives you all fictional information, like hardly it is correct. These days, it's not even able to drive a car correctly at the moment. So I have just used the strength of AI, which is fiction, and tried to create things which basically lets you create interesting scenarios from the future. And so it started with a physical console, but as soon as I started to program, and again, like this is not entirely programmed by me, my very good collaborator called Mathscapes, who is sitting in Australia, he generally works with me to develop this. So yeah, so again, like due credits are to be there. So yeah, so we sat down and then we thought of a physical console that we wanted to build. But as soon as we got into the entire game of scenario building, world building, so you will get to see that it becomes very complex. So that's why it landed up being a digital console as of now. And then we are also working on a physical model, which would be an abridged version of this. So what you see is how to work with this is like there are things which are called categories, parameters, and selected parameters. So the categories are like, for example, in a world building, what you do is something like follow like a pestle model. That is what I follow, which is like, so whenever you are designing for, let's say, anything, you are designing for a future. That future might be 2 months away, that future might be 2 years away, that future might be 10 years away. But you're always designing in the future. So now how and what we have seen that 95% of product designs fail. Why they fail? Because we are trying to always pin down the future instead of saying that, instead of looking at all the possibilities that may arise and then designing for most of those possibilities. So in that way, your product kind of falls into a zone where likelihood of success is more. So pestle model is something which is used for speculative design or critical design theories. So that is what we have done over here. So for example, let's say you say politics. And again, like this is the scenario building that you're doing. So let's say you're thinking about politics. Okay, let's say 4 years from now, you know, like the economy ideology will be socialist. Okay, then let's say the government would be, like we would be more free, or maybe we would be under full control. Then, you know, like let's say there is a restricted voting rights. So, and again, you can go very deep into this, you know, like building your world. And that is where again, like AI comes handy because they can handle so much of data being thrown at it and able to process it. Then like economics is like so much. So let's say like the currency type becomes, like cryptocurrency in this world that I'm trying to build. And then, like technology becomes, like AI becomes sentient, which is quite laugh-worthy right now. And maybe, like we are in an abundance world. And then you do whatever, like there's a lot of options that you can see here. And then before just kind of you set, let's say we are building this for 2045 and you generate the content. It'll take 45 minutes, 45 seconds, not 45 minutes. Till then probably you can see this spinning. That is the best animation that we could do. So yeah, definitely some UI help required over there. But what we have also built in a way is like, first of all, this is open source. So if you want to actually play around with this, you can just go download. We have kept it open for everybody. The code is very well documented, thanks to Gaurav and Mathscapes. So the code is like very well documented. Like even a beginner can actually go through the steps and install it. At least run it on the local. Obviously, you have to use your own API key because we are also not very rich. So you see all the categories, and basically you can change the data set to your liking, and then you can make the tool kind of give the results that you have fed in the data with. And again, like the thing is built for the global south context. So we are looking at fiction from the Indian context, from Africa, from Southeast context, and it gives you an image and it gives you a narrative for that point of time. Like let's say it is talking about Udaipur, it will set up the first paragraph will set up the background for the entire story to kind of play out. And then, like there would be some kind of a problem statement that will come over here. Then there's some character who is probably, like a young person who is kind of figuring out how to deal with that situation. And yeah, so that is what the tool is. And obviously you can print it and share it and download the story. So this is the kind of the first prototype of this at the moment. I think we did a cool feature like this also. So yeah, so that was there. And so yeah, so guys, play around. I would like you guys to also go to the repo and download it and give it a go, because I think that is quite required. See, and if you change the database, you can actually use it for your business cases also. But then, like do drop in some credits to us. But going jokes apart, going ahead. And then this is probably something which I'm venturing into now. Since like I've been tinkering with AI from 2019 onwards, where I was trying to create images when AI image creation was not even a thing. So over the time, due to my struggles, I have kind of figured out a certain way of quickly accessing how to design for, like AI. Because, like there are so many frameworks, like everybody will say something, other people will say something, like so many, Azure will have a framework, everybody will have a different framework. But as a designer, how do I enter to it? How do I even evaluate whether AI is required or not? So there's a very simple matrix that you can look at. The article is detailed out with a more complex matrix as well, which is like just a 3x3, not that complex. But AI can do two things. It can think or it can do. Okay, and we have to think about who is kind of doing it. Either the AI is doing or human is doing it. The complex matrix is think, do, and hybrid, human-led, AI-led, and co-led. So we have to think about designing. If you're thinking about designing of intelligence, instead of thinking of interfaces, we have to think about designing for roles. Like if you can assign these characters to what, so let's say you are evaluating a process or like re-evaluating a certain pipeline for your design or for like a SaaS service or something like that. You think that, okay, this point AI can come in. So first ask whether AI is required or not. If AI is required, what do we need from it? Does it have to do some thinking? Does it have to do something or automate something? And whether it has to be there's some human intervention is there, or do you want to be completely AI-led? So this will give you a basic idea about the where to use, how to use AI, and also then you can design for the roles also. Like like now let's say if it is a Oracle or it is completely driven by AI, then what are the ethics that you need to follow for that kind of a personality? So like so then you're ethically also kind of backing up your design, and then it becomes design led rather than, because right now AI is all tech led and they will say that we have this and what can be done with this. But rather than that, you can be with this kind of framework, probably you can lead from a design point of view. You can say that, okay, I want the AI for this, and the AI should have these things, and then the tech team can say that, okay, it is not possible, but that's fine. So yeah.
All right, so while this gets set up, and it'll just take me just half a second, but essentially, so one, I'm Primankan. I'm the Chief Design Officer at Canvs. I design products for a living. Thank you. I design products for a living. I design a lot of very heavy banking, fintech, finance UIs for a living. That's what pays the bills. But I've had many lives as a designer. I started in brand and visual design a long, long time ago. From there, I moved into animation and motion design. Yeah, I got this, I got this. And that should be good. I moved into brand and animation for a while. I did 3D MoGraph for quite a while. And then from there, I moved into doing a bunch of hardware stuff. Yeah, optimize for, yeah, let's go. And make sure my D&D is on. Awesome. Is this fine? Yeah. All right. So quickly rewinding a second. From there, I moved into doing a lot of work with hardware hacking and doing rapid. I basically ran a makerspace. So I've had a pretty meandering journey. I have dabbled in code. I have painted. I have a bachelor's in fine arts in a past life. And now I design banking apps for a living. But when I'm not designing banking apps and when I'm not messing around with Figma and variables, I do like to explore a lot of different art forms. And one of them, which I have a long list of interests, come talk to me when we're grabbing beers afterwards. But for the presentation today, the one that I want to talk about is photobashing. Now, you all watch movies. A lot of you probably play games. You understand the idea of concept art. Concept art is essentially the very first, what's called pre-visualization is essentially the very first step in how a creative ends up on a screen. When you see Optimus Prime on screen in a Transformers movie, when you're playing a video game and you see that big cinematic moment, it has been pre-visualized. And concept art leads up to all of that. Concept art goes, it's wide. Concept art has been done for a long time, from the era of practical effects all the way to CG, obviously, today, to doing it in mixed reality. There are multiple different ways of doing it. The way I like to dabble with it, and again, I'm not a professional concept artist, never have been, but it's just something that I like to do because I like to dabble in things, and I'm a certified software junkie, so I get a new tool, I learn the tool. I have zero shame in admitting that my creative career exists because I found a crack copy of a few softwares which I wanted to learn, and then the art came later. I grew up tinkering with things. I didn't grow up with art and sketching. I can't sketch to save my life. I can cheat and make you believe, which is exactly what I'm going to do today, but I can't draw. I can barely paint. I taught myself 3D because it's technical, and I did years of 3D to cover for the fact that I can't draw in two-point perspective. But you know what I can do? I can put together a cube real quick. I can put it in the right orthographic view, and then I can take that into Procreate and make some straight lines because that doesn't need me having any real talent. The exploration here is essentially in covering for the fact that I can't draw to save my life or paint. Never have, never will be able to probably, but I'm pretty good at Photoshop. I am pretty good at Procreate. I am above average at 3D. So I can mix all of that. I like photography. Because I've done photography for a long time, as a hobby, obviously, but I have a way in which I look at things, in how I see light, how I see texture. I can mix and merge all of that into making something interesting. So today what I'm going to do is walk you through a file of a complex looking screen of basically this is the concept art. I call this Ghost in the Shell. Heads up, if you've seen Ghost in the Shell, you know what this is. If it's not, Ghost in the Shell is iconic. It's a very, very iconic piece of originally manga, which was then converted into anime. 1995, go look it up. The theme song will haunt you for the rest of your life. But it's about human consciousness, what it means to have consciousness. They were talking about AI at a time when AI wasn't really the way we look at it today. And it has some of the most beautifully stunning visuals. I've long been a fan. And I was fooling around one day, and I just wanted to put together something that, and here it might be a little bit difficult to see because of the colors and the way the screen is. I wanted to put together an image of how I visualize the protagonist in Ghost in the Shell, who's Major, how I visualize her in my head, right? And remember how I can't draw to save my life. So now that I've shown you the final, what I'm going to do is real quick, I'm going to disable all my layers here so we can just work through this entire piece bit by bit. If you can draw and sketch, it becomes a lot easier. I've got a couple of refs that I'll just show you. If you can draw and sketch, what ends up happening is you effectively end up having the ability to put something like this together. Now, I can't, because again, I can't draw. So what I can do is I can work with found imagery. I can take photos myself. I'm constantly scanning textures. The stupid Adobe Capture app on my phone is basically taking up a couple of 100 gigabytes of me scanning random textures. And I know 3D. So I can mix and merge all of them with classical overpainting skills, a whole bunch of standard digital painting skills in Photoshop. You can use any tool. I use Photoshop because I'm familiar with it. And the way I go about doing this is I start with, I'm going to hide some of these panels as I keep going along. Again, what you're going to look at here is essentially just found imagery. This is a bunch of photos that I've slapped together, and obviously in the interest of time, I won't break down each individual component, but it's a bunch of images of random pipes, of junkyards. I went and looked up stock photos of junk, basically, which allows me to put some of this stuff together. What I can then essentially do is start painting some of this. It's a little subtle, and I know it'll be hard to see it on the screen, but I can start adding some volume and depth to it by simple just grayscale painting on top of it, which then allows me to add additional things on top of it, such as a random image of some engines that I found, like just undercarriage of a vehicle, basically. Slap on more random junk imagery on top of it. Keep piling on. This is a turbine. And as I'm going through all of these, what I'm also doing is sequentially I'm basically adding more volume and depth to it. I will get to color correction and how to turn it all into a sort of cohesive whole. But essentially what I'm doing is slap an image, random image. I'm not being careful. I'm not trying to make the most precise selection. That's not what we're going to do here. If you make a messy selection, you don't have to dive into the pen tool. Just paint over it. It doesn't matter. The whole idea is to be expressive. It's to make messy brush strokes. Also, messy brush strokes are a great way of hiding for the fact that you can't draw or paint. So again, coming back to this, I'll keep adding depth on top of it. So here's nothing. Straightforward, I will isolate this layer just so you can see it real quick. But essentially, there's nothing going on. It's just two gray bars, and I've just painted some random lines on it and thrown on a texture. Please come check it out on the laptop if you want to later. It's a little hard to see the subtlety of the texture here on the screen. But essentially, it's just a random noise texture that I've just slapped on top of a painting, but it immediately adds a lot more grit and depth to the image. So I continue doing that. I get into adding a lot more paint as I'm going along. Now I start adding in some machine parts. So you're going to notice more machine parts being added. Again, none of this has any correlation to what of a realistic machinery or whatever. It's just junk images. I want images that have a cool silhouette so they look nice if I was to do a selection and fill with black. If you've studied art, you know what a volume study is. If you know how to do a volume reference study, basically I want clean silhouettes that look good by itself so that they can mix and match, and wherever it messes up, by it I mean me, wherever I mess up, I can then overpaint messily on top of it. And then we come to essentially the main character. And this one, I don't have the time to break it down right now, but it starts with a photo. And you've seen some of this stuff before, but essentially, what's happening here, and I'll open another file because it's a little easier to see it on that file, but effectively, you start with a photo like this, and you start painting on top of it, essentially using a combination of mixer brush, which allows you to mix with colors, which again, if you know Photoshop, you know that's one of those magical tools that allows you to blend colors without actually having a very strong grasp of how the colors should work. If you're not very good at values, it's wonderful. And effectively what's happening here is I start with a bust, a random character, pick skin tones and just paint over. I'm trying to stick to the silhouette, I'm cheating here. And to ensure that I'm trying to match the perspective and whatever, all I did is I projection mapped this, flat plane, same image, map it on a plane, and put it against the background so that my perspective stays correct. Because again, fundamentally, that's one of the things that I'm weak at. But I cover up for that with the fact that I have certain technical chops that allows me to cover up for it. So I go around painting all over this, and that gets me into, and I'll zoom out a little bit again. Now this one's a little subtle, but you're going to notice I wanted to look robotic. I wanted to look, obviously, it's an Android, so it can't be too organic looking. I want to bring in a little bit more mechanical feel. So, and again, as I'm doing all of this, I'm also going through a whole process of discovery. What looks good, what doesn't look good, because I don't really have a plan. Nobody has given me a brief. I'm not working to a realistic sort of assumption. I'm just going along with what feels right. I'm vibing. Sometimes I'm literally doing this on the iPad. It's just fun, right? So I'm like figuring it out. I thought this looked nice. I liked how these messy sort of shapes looked, but then I realized it doesn't look as technical as I wanted it to. So I start making harsher cuts just so you get better shapes which look, and then we get into color correction. Now, this is where we start to unify all of it, right? Standard color correction. If you've ever done photo manipulations, you understand how this works. But essentially, you're trying to match your light, you're trying to match your shadows. Now, I'm going to zoom out a bit here. Effectively, what you're seeing is where are the lights and shadows coming in from? Obviously, most of the lower part of the image should be in shadows. Overhead lighting, the lights are coming in from the sides. Because of the way this image is constructed and because of the original base sort of engine imagery that I found, that bit on the top, there is inherently going to be darkness on top, which will not make the most interesting silhouette. I'll come back to this point because we're going to make some changes to how the hair looks, how we add accent lighting, we add some rim lighting, we'll add some artificial lights on the side. But what I begin, now that the base structure is ready, now it's about stylizing it. So I start color balancing all of it. All these mishmash of colors, photos, textures, all of that looking messy. You start by color balancing all of it. Now we're going through your standard hue saturation adjustments. This I don't have to dive in, I think it's relatively straightforward enough. And as I'm doing all of this, I'm realizing somehow, and this one I know is hard to see here because the way the projector is extremely high resolution projector that we have here. But as I'm doing all of this, I realize despite my best attempts at trying to color match and get the color to look and feel cohesive and somewhat interesting, it's just not working. So I continue on with this, but I realize that the lighting is not quite right, so I start faking some lighting at this point. Little subtle, but pay attention to the sides. You're going to notice more lights coming in around the sides now. And I go back for a little bit. I'm not entirely convinced about the colors. I'm not sure it's all. I like how the silhouette is. I like the shapes, but I'm not quite happy with the colors. It's not all working together. But I continue adding some more complexity because there's a concept, slight detour. There's a concept in 3D called greebling. When you make a 3D model, you have the possibility of procedurally adding complexity to a model. It makes it look interesting. You could start with something as basic as a sphere or a cube. Add enough subdivisions of itself, add enough copies of itself or other random shapes. On top of that, it'll automatically become interesting. So I carry that sort of mindset forward. If I can't deal with the simplicity, I'll add some complexity and then pare it back down. So I start painting around that. And I'm thinking that maybe the lights could work a little bit better. So this is where I start, and this is what that looks like. I'm essentially simple. By itself, each individual part that makes up this entire image is very straightforward. I'm just basically slapping colors and values where I think it makes sense. I start adding some lights. I start tuning the light so it becomes a little bit brighter. You're going to notice all the sort of subsurface lighting, all the accent lighting around her torso, around her curves. You're going to notice some light around the hair. So essentially all I'm doing is I'm adding lights. I go back for a second and try and add some more of those technical little cutouts and shapes that make it look very techie tech and sort of science fiction-y. And then we go into adding a little bit more depth here. I continue adding some more depth. Still not happy with the colors, right? It's just not working. And then you do what photographers do, basically. If you have an overcast sky and you're not finding the most interesting colors, you switch to black and white. It works every time without fail. So colors were not working, and my patience was running thin already at this point. So we desaturate this image. And now suddenly the whole image works better, because now you don't have conflicting colors, because at the very outset, we had already established a good silhouette. We'd established good forms. The colors were not working. They were clashing. You didn't know where to focus. But in grayscale, it's a lot easier to do that, because in grayscale, unlike in colors where you're working with so many different colors, in grayscale, you're only working with value. You can direct the eye with light. And that's exactly what I'm going to do here. I start adding more light to the image. I generally brighten up the image, but I also add like a haze and a fog. There's a bunch of different things happening in this step, where it suddenly popped a little bit and the colors got like the whole value got a little bit brighter. There's a bunch of fog textures, there's smoke, random stuff, just to add interest to it while also brightening the image. Start by adding this one. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit clearer. Start by adding all of these highlights, so that now I can direct. I want you to focus on her face, and then I want you to look at the rest of her body. Then I want you to look at what is the environment in which she is constrained right now. So the way I do that is by drawing attention to her face, and I start adding a ton of light, painting around it, add more highlights, and then we go back to adding some more complexity, because these are easy to do. Straightforward lines, pen tools, great. Start making random shapes, fill them with a solid color, reduce the opacity, slap a texture on it, immediate complexity. Somebody who paints will, scoff their nose at that, but hey, it works. Whatever, looks cool. So now we go, yeah. So then we go into adding a little bit more rim light, and that will give us a more cohesive lighting, add some last finishing touches around the hair, separation from the background, foreground separation, a little bit more texture on top. This just makes it look more techie tech. And then you've got some glitchy lights going on, more color corrections, and by the end of it, you started with a bunch of random found imagery, and with the simplest of tools, you're not getting into any complex Photoshop functionality. You saw all the filters I was using. They were basic hue, saturation, curves, simplest of things, which basically anybody big 101 Photoshop. But by mixing it together in interesting ways, you end up with something that looks interesting. So that's photobashing. And you can take this as far as you want. You can projection map this. You can add 3D to this. You can keep adding this in complexity. But keep each individual component piece simple and build it up. It'll end up with a far more complex looking output than what you started with. So that's photobashing 101.
Cool. Hi, my name is Rasagya. I head the design team at Data Labs in Capital One. Capital One is a US bank. I'm not going to talk about anything related to what I do at my day job. And in the spirit of doing stuff, because you can, I'm going to talk a bit about some weird stuff that I've done recently for this conference called Vischitra. How many of you have heard of this conference? Because I saw one person with a bag and I was really delighted. Okay, cool. Also, there's a bunch of people who've heard. So then I don't have to do a lot of introduction about it. And I won't do a lot of introduction about myself either. But if there's one word that I can talk about in terms of my obsession, it is data. For the last 15 years, I've been obsessed about data. I've been building data-heavy products at a bunch of companies. I love to make art, which is made out of data. I like to teach data visualization and weird data stuff at colleges. And so for a really long time, I felt like I was only one of the few people in India who was doing it. And it is when Gurman, who's another wonderful data journalist, reached out and she's like, chalo, we'll do something. And there's a long sort of backstory which we will not go deep into. But really, we all met at a place in Bangalore. We had called Gurman over to do a talk at Designer, which is another conference that I helped run. And while we were chit-chatting about this, there was this idea of what should we call ourselves, right? And so that's the first bit, which is we literally had a notepad, like a sheet of paper, brainstorming ideas, and then picking the fact that this weird name called Vischitra. For those who understand Hindi, Sanskrit, Kannada, any of the regional languages, Chitra means visual. Viz also means visual, and if you're a data nerd, this is a double encoding. And so it's basically visual. So it's all about like data, visual stuff. And after really narrowing down on this, the big question was, who are we? And so we put together a bunch of folks to think about it. We wanted to build a strong community, interdisciplinary, very different variations of people and their background, who are all obsessed about data viz. And of course, the next thing was we need a logo. Now, at this particular point, some of us who have never made a logo ever wanted to try our hands at doing it, because you're trying to do something which you've never done ever, which is run a database conference, might as well do other things that you've never done. And so one of the things that I am very obsessed with is dynamic identities. It really means that the logo is not a static image, it changes. How it changes is up to you. So dynamic identities could be just randomized. So every time you see a random variation of the logo, they could be very contextual. So if you think of MTV's logo, they would make versions of MTV logo for some specific occasion. If you think about Google's logo, they tend to do all of these variations of the Google Doodle. And then there is a whole world of data-driven logos, where they use some data and then make the logo, right? And I thought, if you're doing a database conference, your logo must be weird and wacky. In fact, if you did not catch it, the word Viz Chitra, while in separation means Viz and Chitra, but together is a play on the word Vichitra, which is also peculiar or weird. And so in continuing this theme of being weird and being slightly eccentric, we decided to brainstorm on a bunch of different ideas. This is not just me, this is a bunch of volunteers. There was Hamsa, there was Rashi, there was Kashvi. So some of the folks who've just gotten out of college, some folks who've been doing other kind of stuff like design, product design before. And amongst all of these ideas, we had two things that stood out a lot. One, we did not want the shape to be very rigid. We wanted it to be fluid, because our community, the people who do data viz, come from very different backgrounds. We wanted to make the logo also be a bit more of that spirit. And second, we wanted the text to also feel eccentric and weird and vichitra, right? So with that, we narrowed down to this idea of a polygon, specifically a pentagon, and I'll come to why those 5 edges. And at this point, usually in a designer's process, you would do a lot more of sketching, you would be spending time in your comfort tools like Figma, Illustrator, etc. I chose to write code. And this is where, a bit of backstory, I did my bachelor's in computer science engineering. I loved writing code in school, and I thought I'll do it for the rest of my life, only to figure out in bits that engineers have boring lives. I hope there's no engineer here that I'm hurting. But yeah, like the work was, like what is the day job of an engineer felt very boring at the time when I was in engineering. I ended up switching to design, went to an ID, did masters in data viz. And so in my engineering days, I was a guy who was obsessed with design. In the design school, I was the guy who was obsessed with writing code. And so I've always been this Vichitra person. And so continuing the theme of Vichitra, I decided to put some of these ideas of a polygon into this software called p5.js. It's a very simple JavaScript-based language, best if you're visual in nature and you want to get into a bit of coding. And I really wanted to see, can we explore this idea of making a logo that changes as we give different values, right? And so over here, I made the first step, which is to make a very simple polygon generator, which is generating a pentagon. You could change individual values of the vertex, and it would sort of move those specifically. I also wanted to play around a bit with text, so I tried to look at what is a typeface which has a variable axis, which is slant. So you might have seen a lot of variable axis, which is around weight, which is thickness, or sometimes around the height. But there's also slant, and in fact, within slant or italics, there's also like a reverse italics. So the letters can both move ahead and backwards. And that got me to this particular font called Cairo, which has a lot of this feeling of, Vichitra, weird, eccentric feeling in it. So with this, I eventually made a very simple tool for us to play this idea of making a logo that's a pentagon, that could be unique, based on these individual data points that come in. And we decided that we'll ask every person a simple question: how much do you like to collect data, analyze data, develop the visualization, narrate the visualization, and then design that visualization. So 5 questions. And with that, each of the vertex gets moved further away or come closer, and you all get like a unique data logo of yourself. This means that all the people who were behind the Vishchitra conference got their own unique sort of logo. And then we picked one of the colors based on what you like to do the most. And in this case, different people liked visualizing or narrating. And so the tint that you see over the photo is essentially based on what is that one choice that you had. This was the broad identity that we had done. We also played around with some type, and that's why everywhere you see Vishchitra, it has this weird angles. And we actually did a very interesting, nerdy way of looking at the alphabet, giving each letter a specific number that goes from 0 all the way till 10, 11, then starts to reset and goes from -11 all the way back to 0, which really means the letters go from fairly straight to going more and more reverse italics. And then from O, it goes very italicized all the way back to straight, right? And so it kind of loops back into it, which means names could be more peculiar. You could write quotes with some of these interesting italics as well. And so that eventually led to this. This was our website. Another person, there were a bunch of people who were all part of this. And so you'll see a bunch of work from others as well. But Schubert, who was another person who was excited about design and code, ended up making this online. As any of you who may want to go online, go to vishchitra.com, answer these questions, and you can get your own sort of selfie made as well, right? So this was taking all the P5 stuff, turning it into a simple JavaScript, host it on the website. The logo worked really well because this polygon idea expanded very naturally into different collaterals. And then I was just looking through photos before I came for this talk. And so, there were some photos where you would see the logo in different shapes. So even within our collaterals, the Vishchitra logo is not the same everywhere. It changes based on the people. And so this is the first part of what I wanted to talk about, which was the brand identity. When I was looking through these photos, I became very curious. It's been 3 months since the conference. It happened in end of June. And I was curious, what does my phone remember from Vishchitra, right? And this idea of remembering things and taking photos to remember things is something that I tend to do a lot. I have very poor memory. I go to a lot of conferences. My phone is filled with photos of slides. Like even today, I was taking some very nice slides of the 2x2 that Debanshu showed. And one of the insights that she had shown, but I will never share it ever on social media again. And so I looked at my phone, and incidentally, I had 2 phones during Vishchitra. I had my office phone and I had my personal phone. And so I had a total of 230 photos from a day of conference and 34 videos. And I became curious about when did I take so many photos? Why did I take so many photos? And so I really wanted to think a bit more about how does this act of photography match this idea of experience? Was there moments where I was really enjoying something and I wanted to capture it so that I would remember it, and therefore I was taking a lot of photos and videos? Or were there acts where I knew that this would happen and I wanted to document it, so I was taking more photos, right? And with this, since I committed to doing this talk, I decided to figure out and make something interesting for the talk. And so I spent a lot of time with AI, which I am not used to doing for code. Again, I love writing code. So for me, writing code is the joyful act. It is not the final outcome. And often using AI to automate stuff is like using AI to automate all the stuff that happens between your born and your death. It just feels like pointless, like I want to live, right? So this was a very big conflicting thing. So I did not use AI in a vibe coding way where I had no clue what it was doing. I used AI for very specific pieces, and I would keep taking pieces out of AI, change it around, and make it. And so after hours of doing this, here is what I made. I made something in a language called D3. It is a bit more advanced than p5.js. And let me see if I can full screen this, maybe, yeah. And so imagine if this was a clock. Over here in the bottom is 6 p.m. then it is 7 a.m. So think a bit more about the 12 hours from 7 a.m. all the way back to 6 p.m. And think of every mark that you see here is either a photo or a video, right? And so all the rectangles are photos, all the circles are videos. And I really woke up, ran to the conference at 8:03. And so time, in a sense, goes from clockwise. So this is 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m. And the axis is a bit more radial. So stuff starts at 8 a.m. and then I keep taking photos as it moves a bit towards 9 a.m. Right? So there is a radial axis. There's also a slightly spiral axis so that you can actually start to see what I took from 8 a.m. till 9 a.m. So you can see starting some very simple empty space. The conference was just setting up. I want to take a photo of that. We were setting up this very interesting hula hoop installation, all thanks to Aditi for getting us some of the hula hoops. So I was taking some photos of how that was hanging. I was then trying to take photos of another participatory viz that you're doing. So morning, you see, I'm taking some photos of just the stuff that we wanted to see. By 9 o'clock, we were ready to get started. And that's where some of my photos include videos. We had a drum sort of performance in the starting. So you see some videos that are all about drums, and I'm trying to take some videos of the starting. There was this one problem with the live stream, and so this photo is going to haunt me for the rest of my life, where I was taking screenshots of how the live stream was not working. I was really annoyed at, at the start of the conference, first time you're doing it, you don't want anything to fail. After that, you can see that there's a big gap. And I wasn't intentionally taking a lot of photos. I was probably taking 1 or 2 photos of the crowd, of 1 or 2 talks. I was running around a bit. The installation that we had made were now slowly getting people to write stuff, so there was some more stuff happening. And you can see more and more photos of talks where I was seeing some very interesting stuff and I was taking more photos. You can see some of that more happening till this point. And till this, for most of the 12 o'clock time, I was just running around to make sure things were a bit in peace. And after this, I went for lunch. So you can see that there is, after some of these talks, this one was by a friend. So you see a lot of photos of me because I wanted to capture a lot of photos of his talk. This whole hour is empty, I was having lunch. And then this particular piece is also interesting because on this time, you see a mix of circles and rectangles. And this is where Aditi was doing a talk. And she did a talk about hula hoops and using that for data viz. And my mind was blown, so please meet her afterwards as well. And at this point, I was scrambling to take photos of her talk and her hula hoop experience. So you can see a lot of attempts at trying to take some of these photos as well. Post this, there was one panel that I was hosting. And so this was not me taking the photo, this was my partner taking the photos, and she had my phone, which also meant that at this point I did not have a phone, so I was using my other phone to take photos, which is why this orange and blue, which nobody else cares so much, but I care more about, was just this bit about me switching phones across as well. And then the sort of event sort of wraps up. There's a bunch more interesting talks, so you can see some more photos here. Slowly, we are wrapping up the event. This is the final sort of culmination. This is the point where everybody comes on the stage. They show some of the stuff that we had made, kind of end. And then by the time we were all done wrapping up the event, this is the last photo from the evening where the 4 of us who were essentially driving some of these conversations from the starting stood next to the, like one of these standees and took a photo of us, right? So that's where at 6:32 p.m., my Vishchitra day ended. And I thought, what better way to remember the conference than to put some of this together? And that's pretty much it that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, thank you.